And so what I want to do this morning is I want to talk with you about some basic skeptic issues that our loved ones and our friends and family may deal with, and kind of equip us all together in how to answer some of these issues.
Let me translate all that for you. Throughout most of the rest of this speech, Christian apologist Bob Dutko is going to equip his audience with a list of talking points that are only issues for pretenders determined to make believe in a fantasy and who don't want reality to harsh their buzz by dispelling their delusion. So apologists come up with phony affirmations attempting to justify their baseless beliefs. They will most often quote mine scientists, knowing that the out-of-context quotation is actually contradicted by the surrounding text. A classic example is when Charles Darwin said that to suppose that the considerable complexity of the eye could have evolved by natural selection seems absurd in the highest possible degree. Creationists commonly clip and share just that line, knowing and ignoring how Darwin continued, saying, "But reason tells me," and then he spent the next 4 pages explaining how evidence for the evolution of the eye is actually compelling. Creationists use these mind quotations deliberately deceptively because then the believer doesn't have to know anything about, science or history or anything. They can just hear a misleading quotation from some expert whom they will see as an authority who agrees with them, even though they really don't, and science doesn't argue from authority anyway. Science is guided by evidence only, but believers don't want to be compelled by evidence. They don't care about evidence. They don't want to find out what the truth is. They want to make believe something else instead, even when they already know that it's not really true. That's why they call themselves believers. They see belief as a deliberate act of will, of mind over matter, a means of convincing themselves of what is not really true. That's why churches hire apologists to come in and lie to them, to reaffirm their faith so that they can pretend as if the absurdities they believe in are somehow justified, so they can look at each other and not feel like complete idiots. Now, Bob Dutko's style of apologetics is not quote mining so much as misrepresenting scientific experiments, discoveries, research, in an attempt to undermine or refute scientific understanding, at least in the eyes of friends and family, commonly uneducated laymen who probably don't know any of these subjects well enough to recognize the attempted deception. And it is deliberately deceptive. Creationist apologists are professional propagandists. They know full well what lies they have to tell and at what cues, and they know what truths they can never admit.
Now, as I go through this, as I talk about it with you, keep in mind, first of all, I should probably get this out of the way first. There are a lot of things that we have been conditioned in our culture and society to believe are true.
Here, the apologist is using the fallacy of projection. He is describing his own faith position, not that of science, because religion is a culturally and socially conditioned set of beliefs. Imagine being raised by evolutionary scientists and never hearing about creationism until you get to college. And only then do they start telling you about a talking snake like in the Jungle Book, or a magically enchanted fruit like in Snow White, and a golem being brought to life like in Pinocchio. You wouldn't believe in that as an adult. You couldn't. So creationism can only be taught to children. And even then, believing parents have to protect their kids from learning forbidden knowledge. So they both censor the sources of information their children have access to, and they teach their kids to automatically and thoughtlessly reject any and all information that even seems to threaten their faith. They are trained to treat learning as an attack on their person. Then, even after all of that, when they go off to college, they're still 70% likely to give up their faith once they learn the testable realities of science, because science is not a belief, but an investigation. Thus, it works entirely opposite of culturally or socially conditioned faith. When you learn history in an American high school, they don't go over all the evidence indicating who did what when. Teachers and textbooks don't cite all the official documents, journal records, private letters, and so on that led historians to each of these many conclusions. They just put it all together and tell you a story. Some teachers may do that with evolution too, but only at the most basic introductory level. And even then, the lessons necessarily have to focus on the evidence that led to these positions, things that religion cannot provide, because the religious position is literally just a story and there's nothing more to it than that. But in evolution, as in history, there is so much evidence to document everything they teach that they can't cover it all. Not unless you're going for multiple PhDs in zoology, paleontology, microbiology, archaeology, anthropology, petrogeology, and paleoclimatology all at the same time. So let's use an analogy to give some perspective to show how ridiculous creationism is. Imagine you're learning history in an American public school, and some kid argues that all of the experts on anything are wrong about everything, and that Columbus discovered Ohio in 1942. Now, you understand exactly what this uneducated, opinionated idiot kid got wrong, and you know how to help him. But if you try, then he'll hit you with his best argument, which is no more than him asking you, "Were you there?" Not that it matters, because even if you had a TARDIS and yanked him back in time with you, he wouldn't even accept himself as an eyewitness against his faith. You know, I've actually witnessed believers admit as much repeatedly and shamelessly.
And for non-believers, they think that some of the things that we believe is just insane.
That's actually true. Dutko tells a lot of lies in this presentation, but what he just said here is a rare bit of truth. I always thought that only accurate information has practical application. And I tend to think that other people think like I do. And, like if I believe something and it turns out not to be true, you show me the truth, you show me the proof of it, and I realize, wow, I was wrong. I already stopped believing that. But there are other people who, when they see proof that they're wrong, they're convinced further because they have to believe the thing, and it doesn't matter if it's true or not. I don't get that. I mean, I've been debating believers for longer than Dutko has debated unbelievers, and I don't think I will ever understand why would anyone even want to believe things that are not evidently true, nor even possible, much less why they try to convince themselves of things that they already know. Sometimes they already know that it's not true. They're going to believe it anyway. I've heard people admit that to me too. And it's not even good things either, but things that might sound good at first, but that are really horrible if you think about it, give it any thought beyond that.
But what I want you to see is that, and I've said this countless times, my faith as a Christian is not dependent upon logic and evidence.
Obviously, we learned that in the last episode. But I should thank Bob Dutko for making this admission, because when I published my essay proving that faith really is defined as a secure conviction that is not dependent on evidence, a lot of believers accused me of arguing a straw man, even though all of the faithful adopted their belief on an assumption of and reverence for authority rather than any facts and evidence. And they admitted that no amount of evidence would ever change their minds either.
But I want people to know it's backed up by logic and evidence.
No, it isn't, as we will see throughout this series. This is when we recognize what a religious apologist really is and does, as opposed to what they say they are and do.
Occupation?
Stand-up philosopher.
What?
Stand-up philosopher. I coalesce the vapor of human experience into a viable and logical comprehension.
Oh, a bullshit artist.
And so what you have to be willing to do is recognize there's things that the world thinks is craziness for us to believe, but the actual scientific and archaeological and historical evidence proves that what we believe is actually really true.
That is a lie, as will be made obvious later in this series. For one thing, there's a rule in science that nothing can ever be proven true. At most, theories and hypotheses can only be disproved, and there has to be a way to do that, to at least potentially falsify whatever might not be true. Thus, everything that scientists consider to be true or hold as probably true is whatever is both consistently supported by all available evidence without contradiction and can be falsified but hasn't yet been. Creationism is not supported by any actual factual evidence at all whatsoever, and is contradicted by quite a lot of it, though believers will lie about all of that. And it has already been disproved several ways too, but none of which creationists will ever accept or admit to. They lie about that too. They even tout a compilation of fantasy folklore, myths, and legends as if those tall tales are the absolute truth. They say that the Bible is the only source of truth in our world. Let all else be a lie. And they believe everything else is a lie because they literally reject all influence from the world.
Evolution is just one of the small examples. I'm very passionate about that. We've been so conditioned to believe that the Earth must be billions of years old, and evolution has been proven true. And what I'm telling you is there is a whole boatload of evidence, scientific evidence, discoveries from evolutionary scientists themselves that they talk about in their own peer-reviewed publications with each other that disproves their own theories.
That's a lie too, or rather a collection of lies, as we'll see in the rest of this series. Remember that no scientific theory can ever be scientifically proven in the positive sense, because science considers proof to be absolute and thus reserved only for mathematics. However, I do have a standing offer to prove evolution in a colloquial sense, being according to an overwhelming preponderance of evidence beyond reasonable doubt, and presented at a Socratic interaction to the believer's satisfaction. That offer has stood for more than 20 years. In all that time, only one person has ever accepted that challenge and gone the distance of 24 mutual exchanges, during which they did, in fact, reject creationism and accept evolution as a verifiable fact. Soon after that, she married me. Maybe 20 or so others have taken the challenge over the years, but they couldn't make it past the first round because they refuse to answer direct questions, no matter how often or how clearly repeated. And you have to do that if I am to reason with you. So that's one of the conditions. That's the primary condition to the whole thing. And everyone else, all the other believers, flee from that challenge like cockroaches when you turn on the kitchen light. And that's why I'm glad I don't live in cheap apartments anymore. Remember also that I have already debated some of the best and most infamous frauds and conmen creationism has, including Dutko himself. And none of them have ever produced even one actual fact that we can both verify to be true that either indicates creationism or contradicts evolution. Not once, ever. And notice also that the proof of that is that there aren't any example exceptions in the comments below. I know already that there can't be, and that you won't be able to post one there either because they don't fucking exist.
But it's censored from the school science books, and it's censored in the media. And so people don't even know this information.
That's another lie, again, as we will see in the rest of the series, and throughout most of the hundreds of videos I've posted to my channel over the last decade and a half. Instead, we will see that the information was not censored at all and is in fact either readily available but isn't what Dutko thinks it is, or only ever existed in the distorted form that he knows from pseudoscience propaganda mills.
And so I think about, for example, the issue of the age of the Earth. And the Earth is billions of years old, isn't it? No, what if the Earth was actually really created just 6,000 years ago, give or take?
If that were so, then there would have been ample evidence of it, but there is none. And there is literally tons of rock-solid evidence from many different fields of study all over the world that creationism in general, and especially young Earth creationism, and particularly Bob Dutko himself, are all full of shit, with nothing but frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies to go on. But just to be clear, the only way to overturn a scientific theory is with a better theory that accounts for all the same data better than the original theory did. So we'll compare both positions as mere hypotheses for the moment. We have solar nebula theory and planetary accretion theory, as well as evolution and historical geology, and a whole lot more on the side of mainstream science. Now Dutko asks, what if all the experts on anything are wrong about everything that only uneducated idiots understand? And he suggests, what if a magical anthropomorphic immortal wished everything out of nothing with an incantation? Abracadabra! No, creationists will accuse me of arguing a straw man again. So instead of a magical anthropomorphic immortal, let's use another word that means exactly the same thing. A deity. A magical anthropomorphic immortal whom we have named God. I'm told that abracadabra is an interpretation of some Semitic phrase taken to mean I create as I speak. And that is exactly what God does in the story. But even though it is a Jewish God, I won't use the Hebrew or Aramaic phrase, whichever one it is, that he should have been speaking at the time, because I know he didn't say, "let there be." He wasn't speaking English. Instead, we'll be ambiguous about the language and the incantation being used, and just say that God spoke everything out of nothing, which means exactly the same thing as I said originally. But this time, defenders of the faith won't be able to call it a straw man. They can't, because their own apologetic sources say that they have to believe that God spoke everything literally out of nothing, creation ex nihilo. Now, Dutko, comparing these two hypotheses, as we said, can you show that magic is real? Can you show that your God is real? Because otherwise, the first issue is that gods and magic don't explain any of the data. Gods and magic are what you call on when you don't have an explanation, when you don't know anything. Even if there was a God, that still would not disprove, nor in any way even contradict, any part of the existing theories that are so well supported and that you're trying to dispute. In science, it doesn't matter what you believe. All that matters is why you believe it. What is your evidence? And it is man-made mythology that has already been proven wrong about most things. Not only that, but it's not even evidence. That's not evidence to back the claim. That's just the claim itself, presented as if it was evidence of itself. So what other evidence? I mean, what actual evidence? I mean, what is your first fact in evidence that you have that indicates this magical creation? Just the storybook. Oh, and the fact that you believe it in your heart so much that you're willing to lie about it and ignore the whole of reality at the same time? So, a literal fairy tale, a fable with a moral about magical enchantments and animals that talk and act like people, and nothing beyond that except your own delusional credulity. That's it? No, I don't have to prove that it's not true. You failed to show that there was any truth to it. So we've literally nothing to talk about. That's it. We're done. Dismissed.
What if there really was a worldwide flood about 4,500 years ago?
Well, that's impossible for a bunch of reasons. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory is unsupported nonsense, as is the ice canopy and every other attempted excuse trying to salvage this fable. And we already have substantial proof that it didn't happen, even if it could have. But just to be clear, if it did happen, if the entire world was flooded, all the mountains underwater, everything, then all plants and animals at least would be dead today. We know that the story of the mythical boat literally doesn't hold water. Everything aboard it would have died on the first day from methane poisoning, and it would have capsized on the first day. And there are different reasons why they would have all died again and again and again after that, including a massive extinction of absolutely everything, including the people, as soon as they got off the boat, if they miraculously lived that long. I have quite a long playlist of videos showing how different fields of study all disprove the flood. I'll put a link to that below. We know where, when, and what really happened, what your fable is based on, and the kernel of truth to that story is not what you think it is.
What if all of humanity started over with 8 people about 4,500 years ago?
Then indigenous Asians and Europeans, Aboriginal Australians, and Native Americans never existed, since we have a combination of both archaeological and molecular evidence connecting their ancient ancestors with their modern descendants still living in those same areas today. None of the ancient pyramids around the world ever existed either, because they're either entirely too old for your timeline, or because there would have only been 40 people alive in the whole world when they built the Djoser pyramid. That's not enough. You'd need a society of tens of thousands of people for that.
What if the various ethnic groups that we have around the world today all sprang from the Tower of Babel a little over 4,000 years ago, and people being separated from that?
Again, we have proof that other ethnicities were already speaking other languages long before the Marduk ziggurat, which I'm told is the basis for your fabled Tower of Babylon, and another story that we know for certain never happened. And notice that none of these questions are asked from the point of weighing different hypotheses to see which one is better supported, to see which ones might be true. We're not trying to consider or analyze. No, we're going to ignore everything and just believe. This is Dutko simply assuming his preferred conclusion, regardless what the reality is, while knowing that there is an actual reality to consider, but he rejects that because the reality is the world. And he said earlier that he rejects all influence of the world. So he literally rejects reality in favor of his favorite fantasy fable.